Daughter-in-law mistreats mother-in-law, but when the mother-in-law reveals she has everything recorded, she starts to sweat at what's about to happen. The sun had barely risen when the doorbell rang, loud and insistent. Mary, 65 years old, with her silver hair neatly combed, opened the door to find a breathless deliveryman. "Ms. Mary Clark? Urgent package for Mr. James Clark." She signed the receipt with trembling hands, a dark premonition growing in her chest. The heavy package felt like it contained more than just documents. In the kitchen, familiar sounds of brewing coffee and toast popping from the toaster filled the air. James, and her only son, moved with the nervous energy of someone about to embark on a big journey. His wife, Emily, beamed, adjusting his tie with an almost excessive care. "Mum, did something arrive for me?" James asked, looking eagerly at the package in Mary's hands. "Yes, dear. It looks important." James opened the envelope quickly, his eyes scanning the contents. A broad smile spread across his face. "It's official. The transfer to New York was approved. We leave in a week." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. New York, 1 week. Her gaze met Emily's, and for a moment, Mary swore she saw a strange glint in her daughter-in-law's eyes, something between triumph and malice. "But so sudden," Mary managed to stammer, her teacup trembling slightly in her hands. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Mum," James explained, too excited to notice Mary's discomfort. "The company wants me to lead the new international project. We'll be there for at least 2 years." 2 years. The words echoed in Mary's mind like a funeral bell. "Don't worry, Mrs. Clark," Emily interjected, her voice sweet as honey but with an undertone that made Mary shiver. "I'll take care of everything here. It'll just be the two of us. Like friends." Emily's smile didn't reach her eyes. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Between travel preparations, rushed goodbyes, and endless instructions, Mary barely had time to process what was happening. She watched, powerless, as her life was reorganized without her permission. On the eve of the departure, as she helped James pack, Mary gathered the courage to express her concerns. "Son, are you sure everything will be okay? Maybe I should go to Aunt Betty's place while you're away." James paused, looking at her with a mix of surprise and slight irritation. "Mum, we've talked about this. Emily will be here to take care of you. No need to bother Aunt Betty." At that moment, Emily appeared at the doorway as if summoned. Her smile was wide, but her eyes cold as ice. "Don't worry, dear. Your mother will be in great hands." The morning of departure arrived, grey and gloomy. At the airport, amid hugs and promises to call often, Mary felt as if she were saying goodbye to much more than just her son. When the taxi finally drove away, taking James to his new life, Mary found herself alone on the sidewalk with Emily. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with unspoken promises. "Well, mother-in-law," Emily said, her tone shifting drastically, "it's time to go home and set some new ground rules." As they got into the car, Mary couldn't help but notice the look of Mrs. Smith, her neighbor for years, who was watering her plants in her garden. There was concern in those elderly eyes, as if she also sensed that something was about to change. What Mary didn't know, as the car pulled away from the airport, was that her life was about to become a nightmare from which she wouldn't be able to wake up alone. The shadows that had long lurked at the edges of her quiet existence were about to consume her whole. Silence in the car was palpable as Emily drove back home. Mary looked out the window, watching the city blur past, her heart heavy with a sense of finality. When they finally arrived, Emily parked and turned off the engine but made no move to leave the car. "Mrs. Clark," Emily began, her voice slicing through the air like a sharp blade, "I think we need to have a talk about how things are going to work from now on." Mary felt a lump form in her throat. "What do you mean, Emily?" "Well, with James away, certain changes will be necessary." They got out of the car and went inside. Mary barely had time to place her bag on the side table when Emily surprised her, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "First," Emily hissed, her face inches from Mary's, "you are no longer welcome in the social areas of the house. Your place is in the back, and understood." Shocked, Mary stammered. But this is my home. James and I... James isn't here anymore, Emily interrupted, her voice dangerously rising. This is my house now, and you are just an unwanted guest. With a brusque shove, Emily guided Mary down the hall to the small back room, once used for storage. This will be your new room, Emily announced, a cruel smile playing on her lips. I hope you enjoy the view of the wall. Mary looked around, stunned. The room was tiny, barely fitting a single bed and a small closet. The only window looked out at the back wall, blocking any natural light. But... my belongings, Mary began, her voice trembling. Oh, don't worry about that, Emily replied with mock sweetness. I took care of it. Your things were donated to charity. After all, a maid doesn't need so many luxuries, does she? The reality of the situation began to dawn on Mary. Maid? Emily, what are you talking about? Emily picked up an apron hanging on the door and tossed it to Mary. I'm talking about your new role in this house. From now on, you'll earn your keep. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, it's all your responsibility now. Tears began to form in Mary's eyes. This is madness. James would never allow... James, Emily laughed, a cold, humorless sound. He's across the world, living his life. Do you really think he'll care what happens here? Besides, she added with a malicious smile, who do you think he'll believe? His beloved wife or his senile, confused mother? Mary felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. The cruelty in Emily's words was overwhelming. Now, Emily continued, her tone all business, here's your list of chores for today. I expect everything to be spotless when I get back tonight. She threw a paper on the bed and left, slamming the door behind her. Trembling, Mary picked up the list. It was extensive and detailed, with tasks that would take hours to complete. Sitting heavily on the narrow bed, Mary finally let the tears fall. How had things changed so drastically in just a few hours? She thought about calling James, but the fear of Emily's veiled threats held her back. Outside, Mrs. Smith watched from her kitchen window, noticing the shift in the household next door. She saw Emily leave, dressed elegantly, while Mary, usually so well put together, appeared at the back window, looking worn down and wearing an apron. There's something very wrong going on over there, Mrs. Smith muttered to herself, deciding she needed to keep an eye on the situation. Meanwhile, Mary, drying her tears, looked at the apron in her hands. With a deep sigh, she put it on, resigned to her new reality, but a small spark of determination still burned in her chest. Somehow, she would find a way out of this. She had to. The night fell over the city, bringing with it shadows deeper than Mary had ever imagined. In her tiny back room, she prepared for her first night as a prisoner in her own home, unaware that vigilant eyes in the neighborhood had already begun to notice that something was terribly wrong. The shrill sound of an alarm clock cut through the pre-dawn silence. Disoriented, Mary fumbled in the dark for the device. It was 5:30 a.m. Her eyes, heavy from sleep and barely dried tears, took a moment to adjust to the dim light of the tiny room. With a muffled groan, she got up. Her body ached, unused to the hard, narrow bed. Mary pulled the apron over her worn pajamas, a silent concession to her new reality. In the kitchen, she began preparing Emily's breakfast. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the tray. Fresh orange juice, perfectly toasted bread, scrambled eggs exactly as Emily demanded. She knew that a single mistake would have unpleasant consequences. Across the street, Mrs. Smith watched from her own kitchen window, a forgotten cup of coffee in her hands. For days, she had noticed a change in the routine of the neighboring house. Mary, once a proud and well-kept figure, now seemed a shadow of herself, always in an apron, always rushing. "Something's not right, Harold," Mrs. Smith murmured to her husband, who was reading the newspaper at the table. Mr. Harold, a retired police officer, looked up from his paper. "What is it now, dear?" "It's Mary. Look, she's up at this hour, rushing around. And that daughter-in-law of hers, have you seen how she's been treating her?" Harold stood up and joined his wife at the window. Together, they watched Mary hurriedly step outside to pick up the newspaper, looking nervously over her shoulder, as if she feared being seen. Harold muttered, his old instincts kicking in. "You might be right. Let's keep an eye on things." The hours dragged on for Mary. Each completed task was immediately replaced by another in what seemed like an endless list. Cleaning, washing, ironing, cooking. The work never stopped. Around noon, as she was hanging sheets on the backyard clothesline, Mary noticed Mrs. Smith in her own yard, apparently pruning rose bushes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Clark," Smith called, her voice carrying a barely disguised concern. "Is everything all right over there?" Mary hesitated, fear clamping her throat shut. It's all fine, Mrs. Smith," she managed to reply, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Smith wasn't fooled. Years of knowing Mary allowed her to see beyond the facade. She noticed the deep circles under Mary's eyes, the red, rough hands from constant scrubbing, and the slight tremor in her voice. At that moment, Emily's sharp voice echoed from inside the house. "Mary! Where are you, you useless old woman? Lunch should be ready by now." Mary visibly paled. "I have to go, Mrs. Smith. Have a good day," she murmured, rushing back inside. Smith stood frozen, shocked by what she had just witnessed. Determined, she returned to her house, resolved to discuss what she had seen with Harold. That afternoon, while Mary was cleaning the front windows, she saw Mr. Harold talking with other neighbors on the sidewalk. Their concerned glances frequently turned toward the house, and Mary felt a mix of shame and hope. Inside, Emily walked from room to room, ruthlessly criticizing Mary's work. "Look at this dust, and those spots on the mirror. Honestly, Mary, even a child could do a better job." Mary lowered her head, swallowing tears of frustration and humiliation. Part of her wanted to scream, to expose the abuse, but fear paralyzed her. What if no one believed her? What if Emily threw her out? Where would she go? The day finally came to an end. Exhausted, Mary dragged herself back to her room at the back. Through the narrow window, she could see lights on in Mrs. Smith's house. Muffled voices reached her. It sounded like a meeting was happening. Lying on her uncomfortable bed, Mary allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone had noticed her situation. Maybe there was a way out. Across the street, in the Smiths' living room, a group of neighbors was gathered. Mr. Harold, with his experience as a policeman, was leading the discussion. "Something very wrong is happening in that house," he stated gravely, "and I think it's time we did something about it." As the neighbors nodded in agreement, a plan began to take shape. Mary might not know it yet, but a support network was forming around her, ready to rescue her from the shadows that imprisoned her. The clock struck 4:30 am. when Mary woke up abruptly, her heart racing. It wasn't the alarm that woke her, but the fear of not finishing all the day's tasks. Her eyes, heavy from accumulated exhaustion, took a moment to adjust to the darkness of the small room. With a resigned sigh, she got up. Her muscles protested, sore from the endless work of recent days. Mary put on the worn apron over her pajamas and quietly made her way to the kitchen. Emily's daily task list was already posted on the fridge, written in elegant handwriting that contrasted with the cruelty of the demands. Breakfast served at 7 a.m. Sharp. Do not be late. Wash and iron. All the clothes, clean the bathrooms. I want them to sparkle. Prepare dinner for 6 people. Menu attached, polish the silverware, wash the car. Mary felt the weight of discouragement on her shoulders. It was an impossible list, she knew, but she also knew that protesting would be useless. At 6:55, Mary gently knocked on Emily's bedroom door, carrying a meticulously prepared breakfast tray. "Come in," came Emily's cold voice. Mary entered, trying to balance the heavy tray with her trembling hands. Emily, already impeccably dressed and made up, examined the breakfast with a critical eye. "The toast is too burnt," she commented acidly, "and the coffee is weak. Honestly, Mary, can't you even get this right?" Mary murmured an apology, feeling the tears threatening to spill over. "So, stop sniveling," Emily reprimanded. "Now go, there's much work to be done. And don't forget tonight's dinner. My guests are very important." The day dragged on in an endless stream of chores. Mary scrubbed, washed, ironed, and cooked non-stop. Her back ached. Her hands were rough and red from constant exposure to cleaning products. Around noon, while hanging sheets on the backyard clothesline, Mary saw Mr. Harold in the neighboring yard. He looked at her with evident concern. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Clark," he called. "Is everything okay over there?" Mary hesitated, fear clamping her throat shut. She wanted to scream, to ask for help, to tell everything that was happening. But the fear of Emily's threats silenced her. It's all fine, Mr. Harold," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Harold frowned, clearly unconvinced. But before he could say anything else, Emily's voice rang out from inside the house. "Mary, where are you, you useless old woman? Those bathrooms won't clean themselves." Mary visibly paled. "I have to go, Mr. Harold. Have a good day," she murmured, rushing back inside. That afternoon, while Mary was struggling to polish the silverware on time, she heard the phone ring. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be James? But Emily quickly answered, her voice shifting to a tone so sweet and loving that Mary barely recognized it. "Hi, honey." "Yes, everything's great here. Your mother, oh, she's doing very well, resting now, you know, at her age." Mary felt a wave of despair. Emily was lying to James with such ease, and there was nothing she could do. Evening arrived, bringing with it the dreaded dinner party. Exhausted and sore, Mary served Emily's guests with hands trembling from fatigue. Emily, radiant in her party dress, acted as the perfect hostess, occasionally casting warning glances at Mary. "Mary, dear," Emily called with fake sweetness in front of the guests, "why don't you go rest a bit? You look so tired." The guests murmured approvingly, believing in Emily's apparent kindness, completely unaware of the reality of the situation. Finally, it was past midnight when Mary finished cleaning the kitchen. Dragging herself back to her room, she barely had the strength to change clothes before collapsing onto her bed. Lying in the darkness, Mary finally let her tears fall. She thought of James, so far away and unaware of her suffering. She thought of the neighbors and their worried looks. Was there any hope? Across the street, in the Smiths' house, a light was still on. The couple discussed in low voices, concern evident on their faces. "We can't just sit around anymore, Harold," Mrs. Smith insisted. "That poor woman is suffering right under our noses." Harold nodded gravely. "You're right. Tomorrow I'll speak with the other neighbors. We need to do something, and quickly." While the couple planned, Mary finally fell into a restless sleep, unaware that a support network was starting to form around her, ready to rescue her from her tormentors' clutches. The sound of high heels echoed through the house, making Mary instinctively shrink back. Emily entered the kitchen, impeccably dressed and ready to go out. "Child, listen closely, you useless old woman," Emily hissed, stepping threateningly closer. "I have an important engagement today. I'll be gone all day. I want this house spotless when I get back. Understood?" Mary nodded silently, her eyes fixed on the floor. "And don't even think about trying something stupid," Emily added, narrowing her eyes with malice. "I'd remember. One call from me, and James will believe you've gone completely mad." With a final look of disdain, Emily left, the sound of the front door echoing through the empty house. Mary let out a shaky sigh, allowing herself a moment of relief. Days without Emily were rare and precious. She began her tasks with a little less haste, savoring the silence. Around noon, while hanging clothes on the backyard line, Mary noticed movement in the neighboring yard. Mr. Harold appeared, his face lined with concern. "Mrs. Clark," he called softly, approaching the fence. "Can we talk for a moment?" Mary hesitated, fear wrestling with her desperate need for help. "Don't worry," Mr. Harold reassured, noticing her hesitation. "I saw Emily leave. She won't be back for hours." Slowly, Mary approached the fence. "Mr. Harold, I don't know if I should—" "Mary," he interrupted gently, "we know something is very wrong. All the neighbors have noticed. Please, let us help." The tears Mary had been holding back for so long finally spilled over. "It's horrible," she whispered. "Emily, she treats me like a servant. She threatens to have me committed if I tell James. I don't know what to do." Mr. Harold nodded gravely. "We suspected as much. Mary, we have a plan, but we need your permission." "A plan?" Mary asked, wiping her tears. "Yes, we want to install cameras in your house, discreetly. Of course. To capture evidence of the abuse. Mary paled. Cameras, but what if Emily finds out? She won't, Mr. Harold assured her. I have experience with this from my time in the police. They'll be completely invisible. Mary pondered for a moment. The idea of having her humiliation recorded terrified her, but the prospect of finally having proof against Emily was tempting. So what if, she began hesitantly, what if the recordings show that it's me who's at fault? What if it looks like I'm exaggerating? Mr. Harold smiled gently. Mary, we believe you. We've all seen the change. We trust you. Those words, so simple yet so powerful, broke something within Mary. Sobs shook her body as years of abuse and loneliness finally found an outlet. Mr. Harold waited patiently until she calmed down. So, what do you say? Can we proceed with the plan? Taking a deep breath, Mary nodded. Yes, she said, a spark of determination shining in her eyes for the first time in months. Let's do it. Mr. Harold smiled, relieved. Great. Now, listen carefully. Tomorrow, Mrs. Smith will visit you. She'll bring a basket of fruit, officially a gift. Inside the basket will be the cameras. You'll need to place them in strategic locations. Mary listened intently, memorizing every detail. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. Remember, Mr. Harold concluded, you're not alone in this. We're all here for you. With a final look of gratitude, Mary returned to the house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Across the street, Mrs. Smith watched the scene from her window, a relieved smile on her wrinkled face. Well? She asked as Harold entered. She agreed, he replied, kissing his wife's forehead. Now, let's prepare everything. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Meanwhile, in the quiet house, Mary continued her tasks, but with a new purpose. Every insult, every humiliation Emily inflicted on her from now on would be documented. The truth would come out. That night, when Emily finally returned, she found the house spotless and Mary seemingly submissive as always. But behind her lowered eyes, a fire of determination burned. The game was about to change and Emily had no idea what was coming. The sun had barely risen when the doorbell rang softly. Mary, already awake and anxious, opened the door to find Mrs. Smith smiling kindly, a large basket of fruit in her hands. Good morning, dear, Smith said loudly, for the benefit of any curious ears. I brought some fresh fruit for you and Emily. Mary forced a smile, inviting Smith inside. Once the door closed, Smith lowered her voice to a whisper. Is Emily home? Mary shook her head. She left early for the beauty salon. Said she won't be back until the afternoon. Smith nodded, her expression becoming serious. Good, let's get started then. Carefully, Smith removed the top layer of fruit from the basket, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were several tiny, nearly invisible cameras. Harold explained how to install them, Smith murmured, picking up the first camera. Let's start with the living room. The two women moved silently through the house, placing cameras in strategic spots, one behind a plant pot in the living room, another camouflaged among the books on the shelf, a third discreetly fixed to the kitchen doorframe. Mary watched, amazed at Mrs. Smith's skill. Her hands, usually busy with knitting needles, were now handling electronic devices with surprising dexterity. Where did you learn to do this? Mary whispered, as Smith adjusted a camera. Smith smiled, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. Oh dear, I have many hidden talents. Besides, Harold gave me a crash course last night. As they moved through the house, Mary felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Each camera installed felt like a small victory against Emily's tyranny. When they reached the master bedroom, Mary hesitated. Are you sure we should? Smith nodded firmly. It's necessary, Mary. We need to capture everything. Carefully, they positioned one camera facing the bed and another directed at the closet area, where Emily often berated Mary about the clothes. Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made them both freeze. Emily, Mary whispered, panic in her voice. Smith acted quickly, putting away the remaining equipment in the basket and covering it with the fruit. Stay calm, dear. Act natural. They had just come down the stairs when the front door opened. Emily entered, her freshly done hair shining under the sunlight. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Mrs. Smith. "What's going on here?" Smith smiled warmly, lifting the basket. Hello, Emily. Lovely to see you. I just stopped by to bring some fresh fruit from my garden, hope you don't mind." Emily looked suspiciously between the two women. Sure, thank you," she said, her tone cold, contradicting her words. "Well, I'll be on my way then," Smith announced cheerfully. "Enjoy the fruit." As soon as Smith left, Emily turned to Mary, her eyes sparking with anger. What did she really want? Mary, trembling internally but determined not to show it, replied calmly, "Exactly what she said, to bring fruit." Emily huffed, clearly unconvinced, but seemed to decide to let it go. "Whatever. Get back to work. There's a lot to be done." As Emily went upstairs, Mary let out a sigh of relief. She looked at the fruit basket, now empty of its secret contents, feeling a surge of gratitude for her neighbors. Across the street, in the Smiths' home, a small crowd of neighbors gathered around several improvised monitors. "Is it working?" someone asked anxiously. Harold had focused on the controls. Cass nodded. "Perfectly. We have a view of almost the entire house." On the main screen, they could see Mary returning to the kitchen, resuming her tasks. On another monitor, Emily appeared, rummaging through the bedroom closets, as if searching for something suspicious. "Now we wait and watch," Harold declared solemnly, "and pray that we gather the evidence we need soon." The neighbors nodded in silence, united in their determination to help Mary. The covert operation was underway, and the clock was ticking against Emily. Back in the house, unaware of the eyes now watching her, Emily continued her reign of terror. But for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope shone in Mary's heart. She knew now that the truth would soon come to light. The days that followed were a tense dance between apparent normality and silent vigilance. Mary continued her exhausting routine of housework, but now every movement was captured by the invisible lenses scattered throughout the house. At the Smiths' home, a rotating group of neighbors took turns monitoring the screens. What they saw left them horrified and furious. One particularly tense morning, the watchers observed Emily shouting at Mary over a tiny stain on a shirt. "You useless old woman," Emily's voice echoed through the speakers. "Can't you do anything right? Maybe I should call James and tell him you're going senile." Mary, visibly trembling, muttered apologies as she redid the task under Emily's cruel gaze. Mrs. Smith, watching the scene, stifled a sob. "How much longer will we let this continue?" she asked, turning to her husband with tear-filled eyes. Mr. Harold sighed heavily. "We need more, Mary. We have to be sure we have enough evidence that no one can deny what's happening." As the days passed, the file of evidence grew. Scenes of verbal abuse, constant humiliation, and overwork piled up. The neighbors watched helplessly as Mary was forced to sleep in a tiny back room, eat leftovers in the kitchen, and work from dawn till dusk. One night, about 2 weeks after the cameras were installed, something unexpected happened. Emily received a call that left her visibly agitated. "James," the observers heard Emily say, her tone shifting instantly to sweetness. "Honey, what a wonderful surprise. How's New York?" Mary, who was cleaning the living room, paused at the mention of her son's name. Her face lit up with hope. "Your mother," Emily continued, casting a warning look at Mary. "Oh, she's doing great. Yes, she's resting now. You know how it is. At her age." Mary's face contorted in pain as she listened to Emily's blatant lies. She took a step toward Emily, as if wanting to scream the truth, but she held back, fear evident in her eyes. In the Smiths' house, the tension was palpable. "We need to do something," one of the neighbors murmured. "We can't let her keep lying like this." Mr. Harold raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Wait, let's see." On the screen, Emily had ended the call and now turned toward Mary, her face a mask of fury. "Don't even think about trying to talk to him," she hissed. "One word from you and I swear you'll regret it." Mary shrank back, silent tears streaming down her face. The days continued to pass, each one bringing new evidence of the abuse. The observers saw Mary being forced to clean the same room over and over again to satisfy Emily's whims. They saw her working late into the night, preparing elaborate dinners for Emily's friends, only to be banished to her tiny room once the guests arrived. A week later, Mr. Harold called a meeting of all the neighbors involved in the operation. "I think we have enough," he declared gravely. "It's time to act." Mrs. Smith nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "How will we proceed?" "First, we need to tell Mary," Mr. Harold replied. "She needs to know we have the evidence. Then, we plan the confrontation with Emily." The neighbors agreed, the atmosphere in the room charged with anticipation and nerves. "And what about James?" someone asked. "Shouldn't we try to contact him?" Mr. Harold shook his head. "Not yet. We need to make sure Mary is safe before involving James. Emily could react unpredictably if she finds out we're trying to reach him." As the neighbors finalized their plans, across the street, Mary continued her servitude, unaware of the uprising brewing in her name. That night, lying on her narrow bed, Mary looked through the tiny window of her room. She saw lights on at Mrs. Smith's house, and for a moment she felt a surge of hope. Something was changing, she could feel it. With that comforting thought, she finally drifted into a hopeful sleep, dreaming of a future where she could be free again. In the neighbor's house, the monitors continued humming quietly, capturing every moment of life inside that house of horrors. The evidence was gathered, the stage was set, the hour of truth was approaching. The dawn brought with it an aura of expectation. Mary woke up to the familiar sound of her alarm clock, but something in the air felt different. Perhaps it was the way the first rays of sun seeped into her small room, or maybe it was an undefined premonition that something was about to change. As she prepared Emily's breakfast, Mary heard the unmistakable sound of her daughter-in-law's heels descending the stairs. "Mary!" Emily's cutting voice echoed through the kitchen. "I need to leave. I have a full day at the spa. I want this house spotless when I return. And don't you dare leave or speak to anyone, understood?" Mary nodded silently, keeping her eyes down. Emily left, the sound of the front door slamming reverberating through the empty house. Once sure Emily was gone, Mary let out a deep sigh. She began her daily chores, her mind wandering to the neighbors and the faint hope that had sprouted in her heart over the past few weeks. Around noon, as Mary was cleaning the living room windows, the doorbell rang. Her heart raced. Emily had told her not to answer the door for anyone, but something compelled her to open it. Outside stood Mr. Harold and Mrs. Smith, their faces a mixture of determination and compassion. "Mary, dear," Mrs. Smith began softly, "may we come in? We have something very important to discuss with you." Hesitantly, Mary let them in, glancing nervously down the street, fearing that Emily might return at any moment. Once inside, Mr. Harold got straight to the point. "Got Mary, remember the cameras we installed?" Mary nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Well," he continued, "we have everything recorded, every abuse, every humiliation. We have the proof we need to put an end to this, once and for all." The words hit Mary like a tsunami. Her legs gave way and she sat heavily on the sofa. You saw everything?" Mrs. Smith sat beside her, holding her trembling hands. "Yes, dear, and we're here to help you escape this situation." Tears started to stream down Mary's face. Years of pent-up abuse, fear, and shame finally found an outlet. She sobbed in Mrs. Smith's arms while Mr. Harold watched with misty eyes. When Mary finally calmed down, Mr. Harold spoke again. "Mary, are you ready to confront Emily, to put an end to all of this?" Mary hesitated, fear still evident in her eyes. What if she convinces James I'm crazy? What if no one believes me?" "Impossible," Mrs. Smith asserted confidently. "We have irrefutable proof. Videos, audios, everything. Not even Emily will be able to deny what's on those recordings." Mr. Harold took out a tablet from his bag. "Would you like to see some of the recordings, just to be sure?" Mary nodded slowly. Carefully, Mr. Harold played a few of the videos. Mary watched, horrified, as scenes of abuse were captured by the hidden cameras. She saw herself being humiliated, yelled at, forced to work endlessly. But she also saw something she hadn't expected, her own silent resilience, her dignity even in the hardest moments. "Oh my God," she murmured, covering her mouth with her hands. I didn't realize how bad it was." "You're stronger than you think, Mary," Mrs. Smith said softly. "Charles, you endured all this for so long, but now it's time to fight." Mary looked at the two, gratitude and determination shining in her eyes. "What do I need to do?" Mr. Harold smiled, a smile of relief and triumph. "First, we'll make a plan. When Emily returns, you'll confront her. You'll tell her we have everything recorded. We'll be nearby, ready to step in if needed." "And James?" Mary asked, thinking of her son. "We'll contact him as soon as we confront Emily," Mrs. Smith assured her. "He needs to see these recordings and know the truth." As they discussed the details of the plan, Mary felt a change within herself. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by something stronger. Hope. Hope for freedom, justice, and a life without fear. When Mr. Harold and Mrs. Smith finally left, promising to return later, Mary looked around the house that had become her prison. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream of a different future. In the house next door, the neighbors gathered, preparing for the confrontation to come. The evidence was ready, the plan was in place. Now it was just a matter of time before the truth came to light and Emily faced the consequences of her actions. The kitchen clock seemed to move at a painfully slow pace. Mary, sitting at the table, her hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling, counted the minutes until Emily's return. Mr. Harold and Mrs. Smith had left an hour ago, leaving Mary with clear instructions and a small communication device hidden in her pocket. "Any problem, anything, and we'll be there in seconds," Mr. Harold had assured her. As she waited, Mary mentally rehearsed the plan. Confront Emily, reveal the existence of the recordings, stand firm in the face of inevitable denials and threats. The task seemed monumental, almost impossible for someone who had been systematically belittled and abused for so long. Across the street, in the Smiths' house, the neighbors gathered. The living room had been transformed into a sort of makeshift command center. Monitors displayed live images from Mary's house, captured by the hidden cameras. "Everyone knows their positions?" Mr. Harold asked, his voice tense. The neighbors nodded. Some would be ready outside, prepared to intervene if necessary. Others would monitor the cameras, ready to record any confrontation. "Remember," Mr. Harold emphasized, "our priority is Mary's safety. If things get out of hand, we step in immediately." Back in the kitchen, Mary abruptly stood up. Sitting and waiting was becoming unbearable. She began tidying up the kitchen, more out of habit than need. As she cleaned the counter, her gaze fell on a framed photo on the wall, her, James and Emily, all smiling at a family barbecue just before James left for New York. The image brought a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger at the facade Emily had created, sadness for the son who was so far away and oblivious to her suffering, and, surprisingly, a pang of determination. That photo represented everything that had been taken from her, and it was time to take her life back. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made Mary freeze. Emily was back. In the Smiths' house, everyone tensed up. "It's time," murmured Mrs. Smith, squeezing her husband's hand. Mary took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She could hear Emily's footsteps approaching the front door. The door opened. "Mary!" Emily's voice echoed through the house. "Where are you, you useless old woman?" It was now or never. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, Mary walked to the entryway. "I'm here, Emily," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Emily stopped, clearly surprised by Mary's new tone. "What's wrong with you? Why are you looking at me like that?" Mary took a step forward. "Emily, we need to talk. This ends today." Emily's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the abuse, the humiliations, the inhumane treatment you've given me since James left," Mary declared, her voice growing stronger with each word. For a moment, Emily looked stunned. Then her expression turned into a mask of fury. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful old hag." She stepped menacingly toward Mary, who, to her own surprise, didn't back down. "Don't come any closer," Mary warned. "I have everything recorded, Emily. Every insult, every threat, every moment of abuse." The words hit Emily like a cold shower. She stopped in her tracks, her face visibly paling. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, fear creeping into her voice. Mary felt a surge of power she hadn't experienced in months. "Cameras, Emily? There are cameras all over the house. Everything you've done is documented." In the Smiths' living room, everyone watched the scene unfolding on the monitors, ready to step in at the first sign of danger. Emily, recovering from the initial shock, tried to regain control. "You're bluffing. There aren't any cameras. And even if there were, who would believe you? A senile old woman against me?" But her voice wavered, and Mary could sense her doubt. "Want to bet?" Mary challenged. "The neighbors have the recordings. They're ready to show everything to James." At the mention of James's name, Emily seemed to panic. Her gaze darted around the room as if searching for the invisible cameras. "You wouldn't do that," Emily hissed, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. "You don't have the guts." Mary took another step forward, years of repressed anger finally finding an outlet. "Watch me." As the two women faced off, the air thick with tension, no one in the Smiths' living room dared to breathe. The confrontation had begun, and there was no turning back. The silence that followed Mary's declaration was almost palpable. Emily, her face a mix of shock and fury, seemed to struggle to find words. The ticking of the clock on the wall echoed in the room, marking each tense second. You can't do this," Emily finally managed to say, her voice wavering between anger and fear. "No one would believe you." Mary felt a wave of strength she hadn't felt in months. It was as if every moment of humiliation, every whispered insult, every lonely night crying in her small room had transformed into an invisible armor around her. "I don't need anyone to believe me, Emily," Mary replied, her voice steady. "The recordings speak for themselves." In the Smiths' house, everyone watched the scene unfold with a mixture of tension and triumph. The monitors showed every angle of the room, capturing every expression, every movement. "She's doing great," whispered Mrs. Smith, squeezing her husband's hand. "Mr. Harold nodded, his eyes fixed on the screens, ready to act at the first sign of danger. Back in the living room, Emily began pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Her high heels clicked against the wooden floor, creating a frantic rhythm that echoed her inner turmoil. "You don't understand," she hissed, stopping abruptly to face Mary. "Everything I did was for the good of this family. You're nothing but a burden, an old useless woman getting in the way of our lives." Mary felt the words like a physical blow. For a moment, the old insecurities threatened to overwhelm her. But then she remembered the hours of recordings, the nights when the neighbors had kept watch, the silent support she'd received. She was no longer alone. "No, Emily," Mary replied, her voice growing stronger. "What you did was abuse, plain and simple, and now you're going to pay for it." Suddenly, Emily lunged forward, grabbing Mary by the shoulders, her fingers digging into her flesh, leaving red marks. "Where are those recordings? Tell me." "In the Smiths' house, Mr." Harold stood up abruptly, ready to intervene, but Mrs. Smith held him back, pointing at the screen. "Wait," she said, her voice tense. "Look." To everyone's surprise, Mary didn't retreat. Instead, she calmly removed Emily's hands from her shoulders, her gaze firm and defiant. "Don't touch me," Mary said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Never again." Emily stepped back, visibly shaken by Mary's newfound strength. It was as if, for the first time, she was seeing her mother-in-law not as an easy victim, but as a formidable opponent. "You can't do this to me," Emily murmured, more to herself than to Mary. Her voice trembled, a mixture of rage and fear. "I'm James's wife. He'll believe me, not you." Mary shook her head sadly. Years of manipulation and lies flashed through her mind like a film. "James will see the recordings with his own eyes, Emily. There's no denying what's on those tapes." The mention of the recordings seemed to trigger something in Emily. Her eyes widened in panic, and she began frantically looking around the room, as if she could somehow find the hidden cameras. "Those recordings, where are they?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I need to see them. This is an invasion of privacy." "They're not here," Mary replied firmly, crossing her arms. "They're safe, far from your reach." Emily began sweating visibly, dark patches forming under the arms of her expensive blouse. Her gaze darted from corner to corner, her paranoia evident in every move. "This is illegal," she screamed, her voice growing hysterical. "I'll sue all of you." "You have no right." Mary took a step forward, years of submission giving way to a newfound confidence. She could feel the weight of months of abuse lifting, replaced by a steely determination. "Emily," she began, her voice calm but firm, "it's over. I won't be doing your chores anymore. I won't accept your insults or threats. This is my home, and you're no longer welcome here." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, Emily seemed speechless, shocked by Mary's transformation. It was as if the balance of power between them had completely shifted in a matter of minutes. Then, in a last desperate attempt, Emily changed tactics. Tears began to roll down her face, smudging her expensive makeup. "Mary, please," she pleaded, her voice suddenly soft and broken. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Can't we work this out, for James's sake, for our family?" Mary felt a pang of pity. For a brief moment, she remembered the early days, when Emily had seemed genuinely happy to have her around. But then memories of months of abuse flooded her mind, and she hardened her heart. "No, Emily," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's far too late for that. Now, it's time for you to leave." Emily, realizing her act wasn't working, dropped the mask of remorse. Her face contorted into pure hatred, all pretense of civility vanishing in an instant. "You'll regret this, you foolish old woman," she spat, stepping forward threateningly. "You think you can throw me out of my own home? Wait until James hears about this. He'll never believe you over me." As if summoned by her words, the sound of a car pulling up outside made both women freeze. The sound of a door slamming echoed down the quiet street, followed by hurried footsteps on the sidewalk. In the Smithsy house, everyone leaned forward, tense. "It's James!" someone exclaimed, recognizing the vehicle on the exterior cameras. Back in the living room, Mary and Emily stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. The sound of keys jingling outside the door made Mary's heart race. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. The door burst open, revealing James, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. He looked from his mother to his wife, clearly trying to piece together the scene before him. "Mom, Emily? What's going on here?" His voice echoed through the room, breaking the tense silence. Mary and Emily turned to face him, their expressions contrasting sharply, one of relief and hope, the other of barely concealed panic. The moment Mary had both dreaded and longed for had finally arrived. The cards were on the table, and now it was time for the truth to come to light. With one last look at Emily, Mary took a deep breath, ready to tell her story and finally reclaim her freedom. Across the street, the neighbors held their breath. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the outcome of this story was about to be written. Justice, so long delayed, was finally within reach. James stood at the doorway, his eyes darting between his mother and his wife, trying to decipher the tense scene before him. The air felt charged, almost electric. The silence that followed his arrival seemed to amplify every breath, every heartbeat in the room. "What's going on here?" he repeated, his voice filled with confusion and concern. He took a step forward, closing the door behind him. The sound echoing through the house like a starter pistol. Emily was the first to react, rushing into James's arms, tears streaming down her face. Her body visibly trembled, a performance of vulnerability that Mary knew all too well. "Oh, James, I'm so glad you're here," Emily sobbed, burying her face in her husband's chest. "Your mother, she's lost her mind. She's accusing me of terrible things, saying awful things about me." Mary felt her heart tighten. For a moment, the old fear threatened to take hold. What if James believed Emily? What if all of this was in vain? Years of manipulation and gaslighting weighed down on her, almost making her retreat. But then she remembered the recordings, the support of the neighbors, the undeniable truth. Taking a deep breath, Mary took a step forward, lifting her chin in a gesture of quiet determination. "James," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "there's something you need to know, something that's been happening since you left." Gently, James eased Emily away, his eyes fixed on his mother. There was something in his expression, a mix of worry and suspicion, that gave Mary a glimmer of hope. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice calm but tense. "Don't believe her," Emily interrupted desperately, clutching James's arm. "She's confused, imagining things. You know how she gets sometimes, darling." "Enough, Emily," James said, his voice unexpectedly firm. The tone made Emily recoil, shocked. Turning back to Mary, he continued, "Please, Mom, tell me what's going on." Mary felt a wave of gratitude for her son. Despite the months of separation, despite Emily's lies, he trusted her enough to listen. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the words that would change everything. "Since you left," Mary began, her voice gaining strength with every word, "Emily has treated me like a servant. She's forced me to do all the housework, insulted me, threatened me." "That's ridiculous," Emily shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. "James, you can't believe this. Your mother is clearly having some kind of breakdown." But James raised his hand, silencing her once more. His eyes never left his mother's face, searching for the truth in every line of her expression. "Go on, Mom," he said gently. Mary took a deep breath, feeling the weight of months of abuse in every word. "I was forced to sleep in the back room, to eat scraps in the kitchen. She threatened to have me committed if I told you anything. I was so afraid, James, so afraid of losing you." The tears Mary had held back for so long finally began to fall. James took a step toward her, but she held up her hand, asking for a moment to finish. "But I have proof, James," she continued, wiping away her tears. "Everything was recorded." James's face went pale. "Recorded? What do you mean?" At that moment, Emily went into a full panic. "Recordings? What recordings?" she shouted, her face twisted in a mixture of anger and fear. "This is an invasion of privacy. It's illegal." James turned to Emily, his eyes narrowing. His demeanor shifted, suspicion evident in every line of his face. "Why are you so worried about these recordings if you've done nothing wrong?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to form a coherent response. Her face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. Mary continued, her voice stronger now. "The neighbors, they noticed what was happening. Mr. Harold, Mrs. Smith, all of them. They installed cameras to protect me, to gather evidence." James ran a hand over his face, clearly trying to process it all. He moved to the sofa, sitting heavily. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I had no idea. All those calls, Emily always told me you were fine, that you were resting." "Of course I said that," Emily cut in desperately, her voice trembling. "Because it was true. Your mother is making all of this up. She wants to turn you against me, James. Can't you see?" "Then you won't mind watching the recordings, will you?" Mary challenged, her gaze fixed on Emily. It was partly a bluff. The recordings existed, but they weren't immediately at hand. The effect was immediate. Emily's face turned visibly pale, all color draining from her features. She began to sweat profusely, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I... James watched his wife's reaction with growing horror. The realization of what had really been happening in his absence seemed to hit him in waves. "Emily, what did you do?" At that crucial moment, the doorbell rang, making everyone in the room jump. Mary, knowing who it likely was, went to answer. Mr. Harold entered, carrying a laptop, his expression grave but determined. "Sorry to interrupt," he said calmly, glancing from Mary to James and finally to Emily, who looked on the verge of collapse. "But I thought it might be time to show the evidence." James, still in shock, nodded slowly. "Please," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Mr." Harold opened the laptop and began playing some of the recordings. The room filled with the sounds of Emily screaming at Mary, forcing her to work excessively, threatening her in every imaginable way. "You useless old woman. If you don't clean this properly, I'll lock you in the basement. Do you think James will believe you? I'm young and beautiful. You're just a burden. If you tell him anything, I swear I'll make you look crazy. No one will believe you." As the scenes played out, James's face contorted in a mixture of horror and fury. Tears streamed down his cheeks as the reality of his mother's suffering hit him with full force. Seeing her lies crumble, Emily made one last desperate attempt. She dropped to her knees in front of James, sobbing uncontrollably. "James, please," she begged, clutching his legs. "This is all a misunderstanding. They edited those recordings. Everyone is against me. You have to believe me." But it was too late. The truth was out, undeniable and irrefutable. James stood abruptly, pulling away from Emily as if her touch burned him. His face was a mask of barely contained rage, years of trust and love turning to ashes before his eyes. "Enough, Emily," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen enough." He turned to his mother, tears in his eyes. Guilt and regret were etched into every line of his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have noticed. Can you ever forgive me?" Mary, feeling the weight of the last few months finally lifting, embraced her son. In that embrace was all the forgiveness, all the love, and all the relief that words could not express. "It's not your fault, dear," she murmured, stroking his hair as she had when he was a child. "You couldn't have known." James gently pulled away, wiping the tears from his face. He turned to face Emily, still on her knees, a pitiful display of smeared makeup and desperate sobs. "As for you, Emily," he said, his voice as cold as ice, "I want you out of this house now. Pack your things and leave. I never want to see you again." Emily, seeing her world crumble around her, made one last plea. "James, please, I can explain. We can fix this." But James remained unmoved. "There's nothing to explain or fix. Leave, now, or I'll call the police." Defeated, Emily rose slowly. With one last look of desperation at James and one of pure hatred at Mary, she went upstairs to gather her belongings. James turned to his mother, pulling her into another tight embrace. "We'll get through this together, Mom," he murmured. "I promise. I'll never let anything hurt you again." Mary, finally feeling safe in her son's arms, allowed tears of relief to flow freely. The long nightmare of abuse had finally ended, and a new day was dawning for her and James. Mr. Harold, quietly observing the scene, smiled softly. Justice had been served, and a family was beginning the long process of healing. He slipped out discreetly, leaving mother and son alone, knowing his role in this story had come to an end. The morning sun filtered through the living room curtains, bathing the room in a golden light that seemed to symbolize a new beginning. Mary sat on the sofa, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, watching James pace back and forth, talking on the phone with his lawyer. "Yes, I want to start divorce proceedings immediately," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "And I also want to know about possible criminal charges. What she did can't go unpunished." Mary took a sip of her tea, feeling the comforting warmth spread through her body. It felt strange to be sitting there, in the room that had been a place of torment for so long, and now feel at peace. The last 24 hours had been an emotional roller coaster, but for the first time in months, she truly felt safe. James ended the call and sat beside his mother, wrapping an arm around her shoulders in a protective gesture. "The lawyer said we have a strong case," he informed her softly. "The recordings are undeniable evidence. Emily won't escape the consequences of her actions." Mary nodded slowly, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "You know, James," she began, her voice low and reflective, "for a long time, all I wanted was for it to stop, for Emily to stop mistreating me. But now I want justice, not just for me, but for others who might be going through the same thing." James squeezed his mother's shoulder gently, pride evident in his eyes. "And you'll get justice, Mom. I promise." At that moment, the doorbell rang. James got up to answer, returning moments later with Mr. Harold, Mrs. Smith, and several other neighbors, each carrying small dishes and expressions of concern and relief. "We hope we're not intruding," Mrs. Smith said softly, placing a plate of freshly baked cookies on the coffee table. "We just wanted to check on you both and bring something to eat." Mary felt tears well up in her eyes. "You're not intruding," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "In fact, I I wanted to thank all of you. Without your help, I don't know what would have happened to me." Mr. Harold stepped forward, his usually stern face softened by a gentle smile. "There's no need to thank us, Mary. That's what a community is for. We take care of each other." James is watching the scene, felt a wave of gratitude and guilt. "I also want to thank all of you," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "for taking care of my mother when I couldn't, when I failed her." "You didn't fail me, son," Mary interjected quickly, taking James's hand. "How you were deceived just like I was for so long." A contemplative silence fell over the group, broken only by the sound of cups being filled and cookies being passed around. It was a moment of silent communion, of collective healing. After a few minutes, Mr. Harold cleared his throat softly. "Mary, James," he began, his tone serious. "There's something we need to discuss. About the recordings." All eyes turned to him, the tension in the room suddenly palpable. "The recordings are crucial evidence," he continued, "but they also represent an invasion of privacy, even if justified by the circumstances. We need to decide what to do with them now." James frowned, considering the implications. "The lawyer said we can use them in the divorce case and possibly for criminal charges," he pondered. "But beyond that..." "Beyond that," Mary said gently, "they're a painful reminder of a period I'd like to forget." Mrs. Smith nodded empathetically. "Perhaps," she suggested, "we can hand the recordings over to the appropriate authorities and then destroy any remaining copies." The suggestion was met with murmurs of approval. It was a solution that ensured justice would be served while allowing Mary to move forward without the constant weight of those painful memories. "There's one more thing, Mr. Harold added, his serious gaze sweeping across the room. "What happened here, and unfortunately, it's not an isolated case. There are many others out there, suffering in silence." A heavy silence settled over the group, the reality of his words sinking in. It was Mary who broke the silence, her voice surprisingly strong. "Then we need to do something about it," she declared. "We can't just go on with our lives, knowing others are enduring what I went through." James looked at his mother with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "What do you have in mind, Mum?" Mary took a deep breath, an idea forming in her mind. What if we created an organization, a support group for victims of domestic abuse, especially elderly people?" Her suggestion was met with enthusiastic nods and supportive smiles. "We could offer counseling, legal assistance," Mrs. Smith suggested excitedly, "and train communities to recognize the signs of abuse," Mr. Harold added. James Eschews, watching the growing enthusiasm on his mother's face, felt a surge of pride and determination. "I can help with the legal and financial side," he offered. "We can turn this into an official foundation." The next few hours were filled with lively discussions, ideas being shared and plans taking shape. What had started as a gathering of support was quickly turning into the birth of something larger, something that could change lives. As the sun began to set, casting golden shadows across the room, the neighbors began to say their goodbyes, each leaving with a renewed sense of purpose and community. When they were finally alone, James turned to his mother, his eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and determination. "Mum," he began softly, "I want you to know how much I admire you. After everything you went through, your strength, your compassion, it's inspiring." Mary smiled, feeling a surge of love for her son. "Oh, James," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "I just did what any mother would do. I fought to survive so I could be here for you." James pulled his mother into a tight embrace, silent tears streaming down his face. "I promise," he murmured, "that I'll never leave you alone again. From now on, we'll face everything together." When they finally separated, Mary wiped the tears from her face, a determined smile forming on her lips. "Well," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, a foundation to create, lives to change." James nodded, his smile mirroring his mother's. "And we couldn't have a better purpose, sir," he agreed. As the last rays of the sun disappeared on the horizon, Mary and James remained in the living room, planning for the future. The nightmare of the past few months had ended, But from its ashes, something beautiful and powerful was emerging. Hope. Outside, the lights of the neighboring houses began to come on, one by one. It was a silent reminder that, even on the darkest nights, there is always light. And now, thanks to Mary's courage and the support of her community, that light would shine even brighter, guiding others out of the darkness of abuse and into a future of dignity and respect. The journey of healing was only beginning, but Mary knew that, with her son by her side and a united community behind her, she was ready to face any challenge that came her way. For the first time in a long while, tomorrow looked bright and full of possibilities,